Ah. Hi. So, I was trying to avoid making this video. There have been a number of times over the past few years where the activist group Black Lives Matter has added to its own personal greatest hits album, or near hits. Mostly misses, really. First, it was riling up the black community in Ferguson and burning down businesses, many of them actually owned by black people themselves. And then it was taking over a Bernie Sanders rally. Probably the one presidential candidate with the most tangible support for black people and black rights, and they were up there calling his supporters all racist. And then there's Mizzou, and then there's the Milo speech. And now, the Toronto Pride organization. I didn't want to make this video because I've been critical of the Black Lives Matter methods over Twitter in the past, and let me tell you, you think the alt-right jumps on you for saying something that they disagree with? You haven't met Black Lives Matter yet. But there comes a point where it's just gone too far, and the amount of narrow-minded nonsense becomes so odious, and it makes you so sick at heart that you can't even passively take part, and I feel I've got no choice but to say something. Now, I shouldn't have to explain my beliefs when it comes to race, but I'm going to state them again for clarity's sake. Race exists. Research on genomes around the world have revealed that there are minor biological differences between different ethnicities. West Africans, for instance, differ slightly from East Africans in how their muscles are formed, particularly in their legs. Inuit people have a layer of fat that doesn't exist in other ethnicities, and Ashkenazi Jews have past and present scored much higher in intelligence than many other races. There are common facial structures associated with various races and other minor things like that. However, I believe that despite the differences in races, we're held up under the same umbrella, and that we do have it in us to be accepting of those differences and move forward together as a single race. No longer separated by regional evolutionary boundaries. So by that regard, using the actual definition of racism as discrimination based on skin color, I believe the concept of being racist is devoid of merit. Statistically speaking, some races are better at some things than others, and some races are worse at some things than others. This is borne out through dozens, if not hundreds, of independent studies over the years. And it's not racist to acknowledge that. It doesn't mean that any individual is less capable of achieving success or following their dreams. It doesn't mean any of that. And as for the revisionist definition of racism, meaning that you can only be racist if you've got power on top of prejudice, well, I'm going to call bullshit. And you can check out a video I made a couple years ago on the topic right about here. Now, here are the details. The Toronto Pride organization invited Black Lives Matter to be their honored guests for Pride Month. Now, that's a very important factor in the story, especially when you take into consideration the behavior of Black Lives Matter in this case. After already shutting down the unveiling of a mural by the Toronto Police Department in honor of the LGBT community, a community in which many in the Ontario Provincial Police belong, they then insisted that the Toronto Police be disinvited for participating in Pride. on an ongoing basis. This isn't just a one-time thing. And they used the excuse that raids on a Toronto bathhouse in 1981 were the cause for this, rather than the police refusing the unreasonable demands by a Black Lives Matter protest on the lawn of the Toronto Police Department last year. And to top it off, just recently, Black Lives Matter staged a sit-in, literally holding the Pride Parade hostage until they signed off on their demands, including a permanent disinvitation from the Toronto Police to basically ban them from all future events, and the prioritization of hiring queer and transgender Black and Indigenous people, and to facilitate town hall meetings between Pride and Black Lives Matter. So what did Pride do? They agreed to the demands.
Thank you, sir. May I have another?
Pride Toronto announced that they welcomed the opportunity to continue a conversation with Black Lives Matter. Oh, honey, they don't want a conversation. A conversation doesn't occur when people prevent you from moving forward. That's actually, I think legally that's called being accosted. If they were really interested in a conversation, it would already have happened. What they have are demands. Demands that, without really thinking it over, you signed off on because, well, I can only assume you didn't want to appear racist. I'm almost positive there was something in the back of your mind clicking at you going, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Maybe we shouldn't sign off the future of this organization without looking into what they're going to do with it first. Now, keep in mind, back to the beginning of the video, that Black Lives Matter had already been invited as the honored group before they had done any of this. Give them an inch, right? The LGBT community is not an umbrella for intersectionality. There's no need to say, oh, we're here to defend the rights of LGBT, but the Black queer community needs our help specifically. No, you're there to help speak for LGBT people. And from what it looks like among the LGBT people I know, they're sickened by what's been occurring. Now, don't get me wrong, Black people have historically gotten the shit end of the stick. And even currently, there are ways in which they are unfairly targeted, but it cannot be denied that how Black people are treated in Western society has improved and is still improving. Yes, it takes time, generations even, and maybe some are impatient, but that doesn't justify the behaviors that I'm seeing. Behavior like this really only cements the mindsets of those who are racist, and actually sees a lot of people pushed further toward, extremist views on race. By that standard, Black Lives Matter is essentially causing a resurgence of white supremacy in the Western world, which we have seen tons of evidence for recently. Look at the rise of the alt-right, for Christ's sake. And hell, there are even Black people who are so sick of Black Lives Matter that they're siding with white supremacist groups over this. You cannot demand change overnight, and if you don't get it way, kick and scream and take over shit. That's going to create a lot of problems. And most of them you're going to have to deal with. People's opinions aren't going to change just because you stamp your feet and demand it. There are no legal barriers to racial equality. All the barriers that currently exist are entirely social. And you can't demand social change. You can only really help it on its way. It takes time. Trying to make it happen with the snap of a finger is impossible, and you will experience resistance, and quite probably set the process back years, if not generations. Black Lives Matter does not speak for the Black community any more than HOTEP does. HOTEP being another Black rights community that focuses more on self-determination and meritocracy for Black people. So instead of demanding that white people move over and make space for them, Hotep doesn't give a shit. They're going to go out and they're going to do what they're going to do either way. And if you're going to be a racist asshole about it, they're going to fucking do it just to spite you. And you know what? I can absolutely respect that. So while Black Lives Matter believes that segregation, so long as it's in the hands of black people, will be a good thing and not at all go the way that it always has historically without failure, at least Hotep recognizes that's going to make the problem worse and completely rejects the notion. They're about doing things for themselves and not demanding others do what they want. So by that standard, here's Black Lives Matter, here's Hotep. And I'm not saying that there aren't critiques that you can levy at Hotep, but that's a completely different story for another time. Segregation does nothing but foment distrust of other races. It's not helpful, least of all to a minority ethnicity within any region. And honestly, disinviting the Toronto police, how is that going to help the black community? It's limiting communication with them is what it's doing. I mean, you can say all you want that, if they don't like it, that just means they're racist. You can say that all you want. That doesn't make it true. When you alienate a group, no matter who the group that's being alienated is, or whether it's justified or not, do you honestly believe that there aren't members of that group who aren't going to take it personally? You're goddamn right they're going to take it personally. Especially if you look in cases like the Toronto police. Now, if they're as violent as you say, why do you just want to make them angrier? Or are they not as violent as you say? Maybe they're just regular people who happen to have guns and badges. Just as fallible, just as kind, and just as bad as each one of you. Fact is that for the past 20 years or so, Toronto police has been making up for the 1981 bath rape. I mean, my God, that was 35 years ago. Like, how a lot of the people that are complaining about this weren't even born yet. And I think that the worst part of it all is the really condescending way in which Black Lives Matter Toronto responded to the criticism after they had shut down the event. Be better, they said. Be better. How about you take a lesson from your own book, Black Lives Matter Toronto? You are alienating allies, left, right, and center, because they want a discussion and you want your way. Why is it that simple, classically meritocratic concepts are now called whiteness and placed on the umbrella of white supremacy? Why are microaggressions treated as though they're just as bad as using a racial slur and punished in much the same way at several U.S. colleges? I mean, this has reached a level of lunacy that future generations are going to look back upon and compare. They're going to end up comparing groups like Black Lives Matter to National Socialist brown shirts in Germany or the fascist red shirts in Italy. You're going around demanding all the other marginalized community capitulate to you, and you hold their problems over your own. The LGBT community is for all LGBT people. You're coming in and you're demanding that all these groups that are supposed to support marginalized communities have to support yours specifically, or they're not allowed to have that support. That's not what oppression looks like. Okay? At least not the way that you're thinking of it. It's ridiculous. That's not the way to affect change. Patience is the way to do it. You've got to incrementalize these things. You can't just do it overnight. The saying, Rome wasn't built today, isn't just an example of whiteness. It's absolutely true. You've got to be the water eroding the stone rather than the hammer that smashes it. Otherwise, well, if the stone is humanity, all you're doing is breaking it up into pieces. Now, I know a few people who've already turned their backs on Black Lives Matter in favor of groups like Hotep. Or, just staying the fuck out of it. The LGBT community is starting to do this as well, judging from the reaction at a recent vigil for the victims of the Orlando shooting, which ended up becoming a Black Lives Matter soapbox, much to the disappointment and alienation, I might add, of people who just wanted to go there to remember the victims and not have racial issues shoved down their throats. Anyways, if you're a part of a traditionally marginalized group like the Black community or LGBT community, or otherwise, I actually do want to hear what you have to say on the matter. Now, I'll respond to thoughtful comments even if they disagree with me, but the point behind this is I really want to show people how discussion works. You engage in discussion by talking to each other. Okay? Both sides are allowed to have a point of view. If you're just going to make demands, that's not a discussion. That's being an entitled little toddler. Just saying. So with that said, peace. Thanks for checking us out today, you guys. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out our Facebook here on the left, our Twitter here on the right, and if you're all interested in supporting Black Trident TV, please feel free to check out our Patreon and buy a copy of my book, Children of the Halo, on Amazon. Thanks.